Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about the senses. So when it comes to human senses, we can separate them into two categories: special senses and general senses. The special senses include smell, also known as olfaction, taste, which is also known as gustation, sight, hearing, and equilibrium. The general senses, which are also called somatic senses, somesthetic senses, or sometimes just referred to as somatosensory, include pain, temperature, touch, and there are a few others that would belong to this category. A lot of times people think that touch is a special sense, but it's not. There are 5 special senses: smell, taste, sight, hearing, and equilibrium. So I'm going to start off by talking about the eye and its role in vision. So we're going to begin by looking at the accessory structures to the eye. So these are structures that are important for eye function, but they're not part of the eyeball itself. And they include your eyelid and eyelashes, conjunctiva, your lacrimal apparatus, and your extrinsic eye muscles. I'm not going to talk about eyelids and eyelashes. These are protective structures that prevent large particulate matter from getting into the eye and also help to keep the eye moist. So we'll first start off by looking at conjunctiva. So first up is the conjunctiva. You might not have heard of this structure, but you've probably heard of pink eye. Pink eye is also called conjunctivitis, and it's inflammation of your conjunctiva. Conjunctivitis can occur due to a viral or bacterial infection, but it can also occur due to allergies or mechanical irritation, like getting dust in your eye, for example. Your conjunctiva is a thin liner that lies on the inside of your eyelids, like you can see in the picture here, but it does also cover part of the surfaces of your eye. When you look at the eye, you can see the white part of your eye, which is called the sclera, and then you can see the iris, which is the colored part of your eye, and your pupil. The conjunctiva is actually covering the sclera of your eye, so the white part of your eye. Next up is the lacrimal apparatus. So this is just a fancy name for the gland that produces tears and the drainage system that drains away your tears. Now, usually we don't think of tears as something that's constantly being washed across our eye, but it's true. We always have tears being released by the lacrimal gland, keeping the surface of the eye moist and free from bacteria and providing food and nutrients to some of the cells along the surface of the eye. So your lacrimal gland produces tears, which are called lacrium, and then they wash across the surface of your eye, and then they're drained away by little tubes that lead into your nasal cavity. So all of your tears end up draining into your nasal passages. You've probably noticed that when you cry, your nose runs, and this is due to the overproduction of lacrium and the excess amount of lacrium entering the nasal passages. Next up are the extrinsic eye muscles. The extrinsic eye muscles are so named because they're found outside, extrinsic to, the eyeball itself. And these are skeletal muscles. These are skeletal muscles that are under voluntary control that move your eye in multiple directions, right? So your ability to roll your eyes at your teacher is due to your extrinsic eye muscles. In some individuals, they have weakened extrinsic eye muscles, and that can lead to conditions like strabismus, which is also known as like a wandering eye. Next, we're going to take a look at the structure of the eyeball itself. The technical name for the eyeball is actually the eyeball, right? And the eyeball has different parts to it. The most anterior portion of the eye is known as the cornea. So the cornea is a clear structure that we find over the iris and the pupil. It's transparent, and light entering the eye has to first pass through the cornea. Now the cornea ends at the whites of the eye, and that's called the sclera. The white part of your eye is the sclera, and it actually is a layer that wraps all around the sides and back of your eyeball. And it's a connective tissue that helps to protect the eyeball. Next up is the choroid. So the choroid is a layer that's found between the sclera and then an inner layer of the eye called the retina. And the choroid is of importance because it does form two important smooth muscles on the sort of anterior side of the eye. And these muscles are called the ciliary body and the iris. These are intrinsic eye muscles, which means they are muscles found inside the eyeball, and they're smooth muscles, so they are not under voluntary control. The ciliary body is a smooth muscle that is attached to the lens of the eye. And the lens of the eye is another clear structure of the eye, and it is able to change shape. And as the lens changes shape, it allows you to change where you're focusing the light on your retina. And the retina is the part of your eye that actually will detect the light. So in the picture on the right here, you can see how the lens is changing shape, going from thin to fat, and that's kind of changing how the light is being bent and then focused into the eye. And this is sort of like your eye's ability to zoom in and out. Right? You can read small print that's right in front of you, but at the same point you can look up and look 20 feet across the room and read some print on the wall. And the fact that you can read close up and far away is due to the shape changes that occur with your lens. What causes the lens to change shape is actually the ciliary body. As the ciliary body contracts and relaxes, it pulls on or relaxes the lens. The iris is another intrinsic smooth muscle of the eye that's formed by the choroid layer. And the iris is seen as the colored part of the eye on the anterior surface. A lot of us don't realize that it's a muscle, and as it contracts and relaxes, it changes the size of the pupil, which is the hole that allows light to enter the eye. Next up is the retina. And the retina is the most internal layer of the posterior space of the eye. Now, we have this big space in the back of the eye, and it's mostly filled with this sort of gel-like substance called vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is like clear jello, but it's not like a firm jello, it's kind of like a watery jello. And the vitreous humor is pressing up against the retina. And the retina is actually a layer of nervous tissue. It contains specialized neurons called rods and cones that are capable of detecting light. Rods are the cells that work really well in dim light, but they only allow us to see in blacks and whites and shades of gray. Rods do not allow for color vision. Cones are the cells in the retina that allow for color vision, but they only work well in bright light. You've probably noticed that in dim light you don't see a lot of color, and that's because your rods are dominant in the dim light and the cones don't work well in that dim light. So these rods and cones are found in this retina layer. So the retina layer is the photoreceptive layer of the eyeball. It's the part of the eye that actually responds to the light. Now, along the retina you're going to find an area called the blind spot, also known as the optic disc. And this is an area along the retina where you don't actually find any retina. This is where the optic nerve begins. And the optic nerve contains the axons of neuron cells that are transmitting the visual signal from the retina towards your brain. And because the optic nerve contains these axons of neurons, it doesn't actually contain any rods or cones, so when light hits there, we don't see anything, and that's our blind spot. Most of the times you don't notice your blind spot, and that's because when light hits there, your brain kind of automatically fills in the information for you, which is kind of freaky if you think about it. Now I want to take a look at how the process of vision can occur. Right? First of all, it's important to know the path of light through the eye. Right? So the light is going to pass through several structures before it hits the retina, the photoreceptive part of the eye. And each of these structures is important. So light first enters through the cornea, and it goes through a fluid behind the cornea, which is called the aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is very watery compared to the other humor I mentioned, vitreous humor. Once the light passes through the aqueous humor, it then will go through the pupil, which is the hole in the iris, and then it passes through some more aqueous humor, and then the light will pass through the lens. Once the light passes through the lens, it will next pass through the vitreous humor, which is a thicker, more solid-like liquid than the aqueous humor, and then the light will hit the retina. As light passes through the cornea, the aqueous humor, the lens, and the vitreous humor, the light is bent. And as the light is bent, it's focused. And so all of those clear structures that the light passes through help to bend the light and focus it onto the retina so that we can have our best vision. Now don't forget, the rods and cones are located in the retina, and they contain light-sensitive molecules that respond to the light. Once these light-sensitive molecules are activated by the light, this sets off a chain reaction of events inside of the rods and cones that eventually leads to a signal being sent along the optic nerve towards the brain.